The underlying message of Tuesday's class was that the decisions we make, and they don't just have to be the complicated decisions, they don't just have to be the big things, they can be the little things like, am I going to sit in my room and play Call of Duty for 8 hours today, or am I going to go to class? That is a decision that we make that is based on the values that we have. And if you value entertainment over education, then those are the kinds of decisions that we'll make. It's not just a decision, is the point. There's something underlying it. There is a belief system. There are, in fact, values. And the term that we used on Tuesday is core values. Core values are those things that we value the most. That's a bit of a tautology there, but regardless, as implied by the decisions that we make. If you want to know what you really believe, if you want to know what you really value, what the real priorities are, look at what you do, not at what you say. It's a little bit abstract. The role of today's class is to make it more concrete. What these things actually look like, why they matter, how to do this, whether it's realistic. We're actually going to see this in a business context today. Where do these values come from, though? Let's dig a little bit deeper. What's underlying the priorities that we have? Specifically, the term we used on Tuesday was what? Yes? Our worldview. And you read a bit about worldview for today, so we're going to highlight some of the major things from that reading. But please understand, there is a belief system, a philosophy of life, if you will, that underlies our priorities, that underlies our core values. And that's true of us as individuals, and that is going to be true of us in a team sense, when we're working on a project or a sports team or a music team or whatever. It's going to be true of organizations generally. A worldview, whether it's seen or unseen, and most of the time it's invisible. Most of the time it's not really articulated, but that is what is the motivating factor for the values as well as ultimately for the decisions. And another way to remember it, worldview is the same as our perspective of the world, of the things that matter most. Values is similar to priorities, decisions are practices. So if you're looking for alliteration, our perspective gives rise to our priorities, which ultimately gives rise to the practices or the decisions we make. The choices that we make aren't just arbitrary. It's not just a random thing. It actually flows out of an underlying worldview. We'll see why it matters for management and business generally in a few minutes. You read for today, and this was in chapter 1 of your text, about a couple different worldviews that are pervasive in the business world. You read in that chapter about something called secularism, which is basically the belief that God isn't knowable, eternal things aren't knowable, what happens after we die is not knowable. All that we can really know, this is an epistemological issue. The only things that are knowable are what we can observe with our senses. What in the world does this have to do with business? If secularism is the pervasive and primary worldview, there are a couple of different progeny. There are secularist worldviews that we see in the business world. And that chapter named 2 of them specifically. Pragmatism. Do you remember the other one? Empiricism. Okay. Pragmatism and empiricism. You didn't know this was going to be a philosophy class, did you? You didn't know this was going to be a theology class, did you? We're going to start here, and then we're going to get really practical today. What is pragmatism? Pragmatism is a philosophy. You put an ISM on something, it becomes a whole philosophy. What does the word pragmatic mean?
Whatever works best to get the goal we want if it's right.
Okay, pragmatic means practical. Practical, it gets us results. Whatever works. So whatever works is the right thing to do. And we see this all the time. People say this, okay, that works. Whatever works, okay, that sounds good. Let's do that. And not that there's anything wrong with it. Being pragmatic is a good thing. Pragmatism may be a little off-center for us, but being pragmatic is typically a good thing because you can solve problems, because you can get the job done. Yes, Michael?
Study and learn.
This works. Studying more works toward learning more, toward getting better grades. If I study this rather than that, that'll work because I only have this much time. If I tell her this rather than that, that'll work because then we won't break up. If I get a cup of coffee, well, that works because then I can stay awake through Zigarelli's class, or whatever, right? Being pragmatic can be a good thing, and as you read, it's, I think, part of the genius of the American experiment. This is actually indigenous to the United States, this particular worldview. Really good at problem solving, whatever works. We can get results. And you can see why that would resonate with business people, because you have to get results to beat the competition. You have to get results to stay in business. You have to get results to keep your job or to get that promotion. So what's the problem? We're framing this as a good thing. What would be the problem with pragmatism as a decision-making philosophy?
There's no morality.
Well, the morality is that it solves the problem.
Yeah, but there's
And isn't that a good thing?
well, should the problem be solved that way? It's just whatever the way works best, whether or not it's right or wrong.
Okay, so the right and wrong, recognize this. The arbiter of right and wrong here becomes the outcome. The ends can justify the means, because we need to get 5% on this, and we're going to do whatever it takes to get that 5%. If I say this, then they'll buy. And if I don't say this, then they won't buy. Well, does it matter that what I'm saying might not be entirely true? Does integrity matter? No, it only matters if it helps us to get the results. That's where pragmatism becomes a competing brand with a Christian worldview, or it can become a competing brand. We may make more money this way, but it may have to compromise our integrity. That may be one of the challenges with pragmatism as a worldview. Now, empiricism, by contrast, means what? What does empirical mean? Good. What's provable? What I can demonstrate through scientific research, through market research, through the data. And if the science tells me that X causes Y, then I need to do X if I want Y. What's wrong with that? I just went out and did a market study to find out if we should have a graduate program in business administration, Master of Business Administration. We went out and we did this customer survey, and they said, yes, we should go with this, and this is what it should look like. And that's the empirical method, rather than me just throwing darts. Is that a bad thing? Sounds like a good thing, right? Those of you who are in marketing, you'll do market research. You need to collect data. I mean, the whole statistics classes that you take, all about collecting data and making decisions with data. What's the problem here? It's the same dilemma that Michael was raising before. It's one thing to just think it might work. It's another thing to have data that it'll work. And if the data points in this direction, then again, the integrity, the morality, the ethics of it, that is irrelevant. And really, it has no place in the public square. It has no place in the corporation. Because what we're really about is getting the job done, doing the research. And then that becomes the arbiter of right and wrong. That becomes the decision-making filter. The point is, rather than just being a slave to whatever the corporate culture is, whatever the pervasive or prevailing worldview is in that organization, we really need to think through the values, the priorities, the worldview that is, in fact, motivating us to make this decision.